Today's video is going to be a little bit different than what we normally do. Today is going to be about a murder mystery. Today we're back in Anniston, Alabama. Directly behind me here is the grave of Frank and Audrey Hilly. Audrey Hilly would later become known as the Black Widow of Anniston, Alabama. It took forever to find this gravesite through this massive cemetery. Everything is very beautiful and upkept here, but it was very hard to find. No joke, I've seriously been looking for this grave for at least an hour, and the directions were pretty vague on where it was located in here, and it made it pretty tough to find. It's interesting to know, as this story progresses, right here close to their burial site is this statue of universal motherhood. Later on, Audrey would go on to attempt to kill both of her children after successfully poisoning and killing her husband. That's why it's so interesting that this gravesite was placed right next to that monument. Audrey Hilly married Frank Hilly in 1951. Audrey had a spending problem. She spent well more than what Frank or Audrey combined made in both of their jobs. With all of her spending habits, Frank didn't realize at the time that Audrey was sleeping with her bosses and other people that she knew for money. Frank and Audrey had 2 children, Mike and Carol. In his late teens, Mike suddenly came up with a mystery illness, nausea, vomiting, stomach cramps. Doctors could not figure it out. And then it came time Mike went away to seminary school, and his symptoms abruptly stopped. Well, unbeknownst to everybody at the time, Audrey had taken out a life insurance policy on Mike. Frank, Audrey's husband, came home early from work one day to find Audrey in bed with one of her bosses. It was at that moment he knew where she got all the extra money that she was spending, that she was blowing through money left and right, and he knew at that point where she was getting the extra money from. But Frank himself was in failing health. Frank was going through the exact same abdominal symptoms, and Frank felt that he wasn't strong enough to intervene with her extramarital relationships. Day by day, he was getting worse. Day by day, he was getting sicker and sicker, and he didn't feel like there was anything that he could do. She was spending so much money that he felt as if he couldn't even take a day off from work to rest, try to get feeling better, or to figure out what was wrong with him. In 1975, Frank died. The coroner asked Audrey to do an autopsy. Audrey agreed to the autopsy. The autopsy came back and said his symptoms and what it looked like was attributed to hepatitis, and that was what was listed as his cause of death. Shortly after Frank's death, Audrey cashed in on his life insurance policy that was worth $31,740. 2 months to the day after Frank died, her daughter, Carol, started experiencing the same issues and stayed in and out of emergency rooms, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. This continued on for many years. 3 years after Frank died, a life insurance policy was taken out on Carol in the amount of $25,000. In today's money, $31,000 and $25,000 aren't substantial amounts of money, and even in 1975, they weren't like $1 million policies. She didn't care about that. All that mattered to her was she was going to get a pocket full of money that she could spend. After everything was said and done, and Carol, her daughter, Audrey's daughter, told stories of her mom coming in, giving her shots, and telling her that it was medicine to try and help fix whatever was ailing her stomach issues. We now know that that wasn't the case, that she was injecting her with rat poison. To Audrey's surprise, though, the day that she withdrew Carol from the hospital, she was arrested right here at Anniston, Alabama for writing bad checks. Even though Carol was no longer at the hospital, the doctors, they continued to do their research, and eventually they did find out that she did test positive for arsenic poisoning. Audrey at this time was still in jail. At that time, they notified the Anniston Police Department, who had custody of Audrey already, but they immediately exhumed Frank's body and started doing the testing, which came back positive for arsenic poisoning. Audrey was still in jail for the bad checks when they came and informed her that she was under arrest and now being charged with the attempted murder of her daughter, Carol. On November 9th, 1979, Audrey, for whatever reason, was released from jail for her bad checks on bail. 10 days later, on November the 19th, Audrey's aunt reported a break-in at her house. The only items that were taken was her car and some women's clothing. There was also a note that was left behind that said, "Do not call the police or we will burn you out of your home." On January the 11th, she was indicted on the charge of murder for Frank's death. Audrey was convicted of murdering her husband and the attempted murder of her daughter. In the time prior to that conviction, though, after she made bail until that point, she traveled up to North United States to New England, where she met another man named John. After being indicted on the charges, she went to trial and she was found guilty of murdering her husband and the attempted murder of her child. John moves from New England down here to Anniston so that he can go visit her in the prison here. Audrey is allowed conjugal visits. She then gets approved by a judge to get 3-day passes on the weekends to leave and be able to go stay with her husband and spend time with him. In February of 1987, she was on a 3-day weekend and she disappeared. 4 days later, police are called to a suspicious person call. While the police are there, Audrey comes walking out of the woods. They recapture her, re-arrest her. She had spent the previous 4 days in the woods and was ailing from hypothermia. So when the police rearrested her, they took her to the hospital so she could be treated for hypothermia. And it was there that she passed away, bringing us back here to Forest Lawn Cemetery, where she passed away in 1987 from a heart attack brought on by hypothermia caused because of the 4 days she spent in the woods. Her time in prison to her time now passed away, no other person has gotten sick. Audrey's son Mike and Audrey's daughter Carol still live to this day, are successful. Now, many years later, Audrey has been given the nickname the Black Widow of Anniston. All year long, people come right here to Forest Lawn Cemetery to view her grave after learning about this story, because it is a pretty compelling murder mystery. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and end this video now. I know we took a little bit darker tone for today's video. Tomorrow we will pick it back up and we'll be touring another location north. So I want to thank you all for watching. I will see you tomorrow.